public sector pension schemes in the Isle of Man are what you call unfunded schemes. When you pay your contributions, they don't go into a ring-fence pot. They are applied towards the benefits that exist. And as we now have a spike in terms of the age profile of people in the public sector, the contributions that people pay don't match the benefits that the recipients of the scheme get. So there's a gap between them. And looking at the actuarial projections, because we have a slightly older public sector, it means that the gap will get bigger. And the gap, it's something that's grown up during the lifespan of the people who are coming up to retirement in the public sector, and it's a legacy. It's called the legacy funding gap.
What size is it?
It's at the moment, for example, it was 20 million, I think, a couple of years ago. The projections are that it will get worse. The original projection was it would go to 60 million very shortly. However, the reforms that have already been instituted over the last 8 years have reduced that by 25%. So the projection for the gap is now down to 45 million. But the projection is going to get worse before it gets better. And if you think about it, if we're downsizing government, it means less people are paying in and more people are taking out. So as part of the downsizing of government process, which Tynwald are keen to do, it inevitably makes the gap bigger. So I'm afraid the gap's not going to go away. There were references to silver bullets and magic wands in Tynwald, and they're absolutely right. There is no silver bullet. We've just got to have a way of working through this. It's taken over 30 or 40 years to create this problem. It's going to take the same length of time to resolve it, I'm afraid.
Well, what seems to be the nub of that problem? Because it seems that highly paid actuaries and other professionals in pensions, they didn't notice until it was far too late. And what's the nub of that problem?
Well, the nub of the problem is when we go back to the halcyon days of the 80s and 90s, when there was lots of money slushing around, the government committed to having very good quality people in the infrastructure. And we all want the top teachers, doctors, dare I say journalists as well. We want good frontline police officers and emergency services, and you want very good people within the infrastructure of government. And they were competing with very attractive salaries and bonuses and things in the private sector. So the government committed to offering very good packages to its staff, and everybody took their eye off the ball. We were awash with money, and then we suddenly woken up and realised that the gap was getting bigger and bigger. That was why there were reforms and the establishment of GUS, which is the Government Unified Scheme, and the establishment of a dedicated public sector pensions authority, which was established under the Pensions Act of 2011, specifically to try and rein in some of the problems.
Well, what are we talking about then in the Government Unified Scheme? Who are we talking about?
Government Unified Scheme is one of the largest schemes. There were about 26 or 27 different public schemes. There's now only 8 or 9. So we've consolidated a lot of them. Most of the people, for example, who work as conventional civil servants are in the Government Unified Scheme. There are other schemes, firefighters, teachers, police officers, judiciary, things like that.
Well, speaking of clarifying exactly the schemes, we hear a lot about defined contributions and defined benefit schemes. The difference may be clear to some, but for those whom it isn't, what is the difference?
Well, it does what it says on the tin. A defined benefit scheme means that when you pay in, when you retire, you will have a defined amount of benefit, which could be a proportion of your salary depending on the years of service that you have. A defined contribution scheme is when the employer and the employee pay a certain amount of money into a ring-fenced pot of money, and the benefits that you receive are in many respects at the mercy of the quality of the investments for which the funds are invested. So in simple terms, a defined benefit scheme, the risk is with the employer, and a defined contribution scheme, the risk is with the employee.
Well, just finally, why wasn't this tackled gradually over a long period? It seems to have been a series of comparative knee-jerk reactions.
Well, I think we can't really dwell on what's gone on in the past, but I think the Tony Brown administration realised that there were problems and moved towards the establishment of the Public Sector Pensions Authority and the Government Unified Scheme. And it's a very unpopular topic, and it's one that I think less robust politicians would like to fudge and leave for the next administration. And one of the matters that gives me enormous confidence, having attended the debate, which I must say I was extremely impressed with both the quality of the debate and the courteousness and eloquence of the participants, but this Tynwald likes to get things done, and they're not afraid to take this problem head on. And I think similarly, the employees have been very realistic and very progressive. So both sides want a resolution to this, and there is a lot of trust and goodwill building up, which is fundamental to resolving these problems, I think.